This video was made possible thanks to CuriosityStream. Watch TLDR ad-free and get exclusive videos from us by signing up to the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal at curiositystream.com/TLDREU. We're now entering day 22 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and what began as a chaotic flurry of fighting seems to have slowed to a relative stalemate. Zelensky seems relatively secure in Kyiv, and since taking Kherson on March the 3rd, Russian forces have made relatively little progress in the south. So we thought it'd be a good idea to do a video on the current state of the conflict. We're going to split this video into two parts. First, we're going to look at where and why the Russian army has stalled, and second, we're going to ask whether the Russians can actually afford this stalling, or whether it'll lend Ukraine the upper hand. So let's get into it. In the first week or so of the invasion, Russian forces made relatively steady progress. In the north, they moved towards Kyiv from Belarus and from the east via Sumy. In the south, Russian forces made quick progress from Crimea, joining up with Russian forces in Donbass and encircling Mariupol. However, in the last few days, the invasion has apparently stalled. Russian forces in the south have only made limited progress westwards towards Odessa, and Russian forces in the north have so far failed to encircle Kyiv. Most of the fighting is contained to Kyiv's western suburbs, and Kyiv is still very much accessible from the south and the west. This is how the Prime Ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia were able to meet Zelensky in Kyiv. They just took the train. Anyway, according to maps produced by the UK's Ministry of Defence, Russian forces have made nearly no progress in the last week. A Ukrainian presidential advisor even announced that Ukrainian forces had staged counter-offensives to retake, quote, operational areas, although it's worth saying that his claims are yet to be verified. Nonetheless, even if Ukrainian forces aren't actively retaking territory, it's at least true that the Russian army has stalled. So why is this? Well, it's probably partly down to logistics. As we detailed in other videos, the Russian army has relatively few supply trucks, and has apparently been hindered by shortages of fuel, food and ammunition. Military analysts have estimated that Russia doesn't have enough trucks to supply its army more than 90 miles beyond supply dumps, and it's no coincidence that the Russian army has struggled to advance more than 90 miles from the Russian border. The exception here is in the south, where the Russians have captured certain Ukrainian railheads, which allows them to use rail to resupply at greater distances. Anyway, you get the point. The Russians are probably running low on resources, so need to take a second to resupply. It also looks like the Russians are running low on personnel. The Russian Defense Ministry estimates that Russia has suffered an astonishing 13,000 casualties in the war so far, while US intelligence puts the number slightly lower, at somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000. Zelensky also claims that Ukraine is currently holding around 1,000 Russian prisoners of war. For context, 4,431 Americans were killed during the US's 8 years in Iraq, and 14,453 Soviets were killed in the Soviet-Afghan War, which lasted nearly a decade. Even the low-end figure of 6,000 would be pretty terrible for the Russians. Assuming a KIA to wounded ratio of 4:1, which is broadly in keeping with other similar conflicts, that would mean that Russia had 24,000 wounded, for a total of 30,000 troops out of action. 30,000 troops would represent more than 15% of the 190,000 troops Russia had originally amassed on the Ukrainian border. This would be broadly in keeping with a recent briefing by US intelligence, suggesting that Russia had lost 10% of its available forces since invasion. Now, this might not sound too bad. After all, 85% of 190,000 is still a pretty big number. But it's worth keeping in mind that an army starts becoming ineffective way before it's wiped out. Now, obviously, these are very rough back-of-the-napkin calculations, but you get the point. Russia has lost a non-trivial amount of personnel, so it's very possible that they're taking some time to redeploy. Interestingly though, US intelligence has reported that Russia isn't sending its own reserve troops, and is instead relying on irregular forces, like Syrian mercenaries and Chechens. Russia's defense minister claimed in a press conference that as many as 16,000 Syrians were being flown over to join the fight. while Chechnya's Instagram-friendly strongman claimed that 10,000 Chechens have joined Russia's forces. There have even been reports of South Ossetians being redeployed in Ukraine. Now, it's obviously worth taking all these figures with a pinch of salt. Most analysts reckon that the true number of Chechens involved is probably about half that. There have been no verified reports of Syrians fighting in Ukraine, and South Ossetia has a population of just 30,000. Nonetheless, it does look like Russia is using this time to bulk up its depleted forces, both with more supplies and more personnel. So, on to the second part of this video. Is this actually a good idea? Well, there are definitely downsides for the Russians. The longer this war drags on, the worse Russia's economy suffers, thanks to the West's unprecedented sanctions. It also makes the Kremlin's official line, that this is just a special military operation, seem increasingly implausible. After all, what sort of special operation takes months, requires foreign mercenaries, and involves thousands of casualties? Phone surveys taken in Moscow by Alexei Navalny's team have already found that the Russian public's support for the war is waning, and state media has been hit by a series of resignations in recent days. Now, obviously, these surveys have to be taken with a massive pinch of salt. They were conducted by Putin's main opposition, and Moscow is far more liberal than Russia generally. Nonetheless, it's plausible that the Russian public are becoming more mistrustful of the public narrative the longer the war goes on, which will make any further delays harder to explain. But perhaps most worryingly for Putin will be the fact that the longer the Russian army is stalled, the more weapon shipments Ukraine receives. As we explained earlier, the Russians have failed to encircle Kyiv, which means that weapons can be delivered to Ukrainian forces relatively easily. Recently, Russia has tried to discourage further weapons shipments. On the 12th of March, the Deputy Foreign Minister said that Russia now considered foreign shipments to be legitimate targets, and on the same day, Russia fired 80 cruise missiles at a military base near Lviv in the west of Ukraine, which was clearly intended as a warning against further shipments. Unfortunately for Putin, the shipments have continued, and Biden announced another $1 billion in military aid on Wednesday, reportedly including state-of-the-art US-made drones. So that's the latest on the war in Ukraine. Russia has stalled, presumably to resupply. As to what happens next, no one knows. Russia seems to be relying more heavily on artillery, and there's some speculation that Russia will change its focus away from Kyiv towards Ukrainian forces in western Donbass. But given that Russia is currently deploying additional troops, a more humanitarian catastrophe looks likely. If that's not enough TLDR for you, you should head over to Nebula. You might have heard of them before, but my creator friends and I have teamed up to build our own platform where we don't need to worry about demonetization or the algorithm. Over there you can find all of our latest videos ad-free, and we've also got a bunch of content exclusively over on Nebula, which will never come to YouTube. It's not just us either, all of our favourite educational creators are already there, like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, Polymatter, Legal Eagle, Half as Interesting, and many more. But wait, we said this video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, right? Well, as a platform full of the best documentaries online, they naturally love educational creators like us. As such, we've worked out a deal whereby if you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description, you'll also get free access to Nebula. That's not a trial either, you'll get access for as long as you're a member. To make things even better, for a limited time, they're offering a deal where you can get 26% off their already low price, making an entire year of both services less than $15. Less than $15 a year for all your favourite educational creators, as well as superb documentaries on CuriosityStream. Signing up at curiositystream.com/TLDREU or clicking the link below not only gets you the deal, but it also directly supports TLDR and educational content on the platform more generally, as well as getting you original content and an ad-free experience.